So mine is just talking about, various things like that. So if you want, I'm happy to. If you want to welcome people to do a line acknowledgement, call me up. I can
Yeah.
do mine,
Okay.
and then you can do yours. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And then after me, I'm gonna call up Philippa to do the Feldman.
Yep.
Um, I'm gonna wrap up with some thank yous and some logistical stuff, and
Mhm.
then Denise will introduce the keynote speaker.
Okay.
So I have her script. I
Okay.
just need to find her.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then we're off and running.
Sounds good. And are these our winners here? All right.
Uh,
3 winners, 2 winners.
One, the first one, I don't know if the student is on there.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. That's all right. I can shake their hands afterwards.
yes.
Okay. Marvelous.
Good morning. Is this on? Okay. Welcome to the 23rd Annual Diversity Conference. It is my pleasure to welcome you here today. My name is Dr. Demita Davis, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer here at SUNY Brockport. Before we begin, first thing, can you please silence your phone and any and all electronic devices that you may have? Thank you. To begin, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. The Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at SUNY Brockport acknowledges that we occupy the unceded lands of the Onondaga Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy. As we begin this year's Diversity Conference, we honor the original inhabitants and stewards of this land. At this time, I would like to introduce and welcome our president, Dr. Heidi McPherson, to give her welcome.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Heidi McPherson. I'm honored to serve as president of SUNY Brockport. I want to welcome our students, our faculty, staff, and community members who are joining us today. As Dr. Davis noted, this marks the 23rd year that SUNY Brockport has hosted the annual Diversity Conference. And as I reflect on what that means, I can't help but feel grateful. I'm grateful to be part of a community that is willing to engage in deep and meaningful, if sometimes uncomfortable, conversations. These conversations are ones that encourage us to stretch, to grow, and to open our minds to new ideas. Today, just as we have done so many times before, we are gathering not only to learn, but to celebrate our rich history and commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I would like to thank the Diversity Conference Committee and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for planning and organizing this event. We are so appreciative of the work that you've done, and I think that actually deserves a round of applause. The theme of this year's conference is Uniting Our Communities for an Inclusive Brockport. I strongly believe that engaging in meaningful and open dialogue is the key to solving so many of the problems we face in the world today. Now, at the beginning of the academic year, I reinforced SUNY Brockport's commitment to being a university that fosters civil discourse. Because we know we must work together to become a place where people can disagree without being disagreeable, where people can truly listen and learn from each other instead of talking past each other, where we can create a sense of belonging, even when we do not agree with everyone around us. I realize this is not an easy thing to do, but it's important to remember that few things worth doing are actually easy. Sometimes they're really hard indeed. But we need to stretch ourselves. We need to make ourselves uncomfortable. We need to engage in difficult conversations. That's how we learn, and that's how we grow. And that's how we grow stronger and more inclusive as a community. Thank you all so much for being here today. It signifies your commitment to inclusivity, which is one of SUNY Brockport's cherished values. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from this morning's keynote speaker and taking part in other sessions that have been planned for today. Thank you so much for being here.
Each year, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, along with the Planning Committee, gather to develop a theme for each conference that helps us focus our conversation and what we want to convey within our community. This year was no different. However, there's been a lot of things happening, as we know. We wanted this year's theme to build upon previous conference themes, as well as, in a way, respond to current national climate. Let me be clear that the goal of the conference is not to get into a debate about the challenges we are facing across this country and the world, but how do we help foster a sense of belonging at Brockport for all members of our community? The focus for me is to make sure that we can really focus on our sphere of influence here at the university, what we can do to celebrate the diversity within the SUNY Brockport, how we can demonstrate that as a value added to our educational enterprise, and how we as a community can come together and, as the president said, have civil discourse. As we seek to build a better Brockport, I invite and encourage you to actively engage in the workshops, presentations, and discussions throughout the day. I ask you to make room for diverse perspectives, thoughts, and experiences. To sit with the information that you'll learn today. Identify what you like to learn more about, what content challenged your ways of knowing and being, and try to discern why that has challenged you. I encourage you and invite you to be part of creating a more welcoming and inclusive environment, which takes a village, as we know. And we all must be a part of building the community that we want to see in this world. When we do, you will realize there's enough room for all of us to coexist in this space and maintain our core values and beliefs that we have come into this space with. We want to model the behavior that we want our students, faculty, and staff to behold as we engage in difficult and challenging conversations. So on behalf of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, I welcome you to the 23rd Annual Diversity Conference. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Philippa Carroll from the Department of Anthropology, who will share with you our winner and recipients of this year's Feldman Research Paper Award.
Good morning, everybody. It is my privilege to present the award winner for the Douglas A. Feldman Paper Award for the academic year of 2023 to 2024. The late Douglas Feldman was a professor emeritus here in the Department of Anthropology. He was a medical and applied anthropologist who pioneered anthropological research on the pandemic that really loomed large for us at that time, and it was pre-COVID, so it was HIV/AIDS. He founded the AIDS Center of Queens County in Queens, New York, which was an organization that was really innovative for its time in helping people live with HIV/AIDS. Dr. Feldman established the fund for this paper award prior to retiring in 2016, and unfortunately passed away in 2020 from complications with ALS. Dr. Feldman was born a Ukrainian Jewish immigrant. Into a Ukrainian Jewish immigrant family. He earned his undergraduate and master's degrees in anthropology, moving on to complete his PhD in anthropology at SUNY Stony Brook. His doctoral research focused on the new emerging pandemic of HIV/AIDS, and over his lifetime, he would become known as an activist scholar. He would consult on AIDS policy in Uganda and Bangladesh, conduct research in the US as well, at that time as a faculty researcher at the University of Miami School of Medicine, before he then moved on to Brockport. So he came to us to chair our department in 2001. He published 3 books while here, among numerous other publications. In 2008, the Society for Medical Anthropology presented him with the Downing Distinguished Service Award. In 2013, Dr. Feldman created the LGBTQ Paper Award Prize to promote student academic engagement with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer issues with a generous annual endowment that offers $1,000 for the first place and $100 for the runner-up. I am grateful to be honoring his legacy today. Before I announce our prize winner, let me just say that this competition could not happen without the support of many people, but I want to acknowledge our selection committee. Some of them are here today, so I'm going to ask that they stand and that we can give them a round of applause. Our committee consists of Dr. Milo Oburn, Dr. Kyle Green, Dr. Amy Shima, Dr. Cody Miller, and Dr. Irene Katonen Keating. A round of applause, please. Thank you. Also, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the wonderful work of our scholarships office, includes Garrett Rowe here and Hillary Brintle. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to announce our first prize winner for a paper entitled Memory, Sexuality, Bildungsroman in Funhouse and Never Let Me Go. This is a literary comparative analysis of a print novel as well as a graphic novel. Theo Guth, come up, receive your award, and then we'll hear a bit from the paper itself. So, are we doing pictures now or later? Yes. Should I hand it to him or should we take it?
Sorry. All right, so where do you want, I tell you before we do this, where do you want us to be for pictures? Okay, then, congratulations. Come here. Take this is yours.
Congratulations. And you ready to read your paper?
All right, so hello everybody. My name is Theo Guth. I'm in my third year here at Brockport. I'm in the English Adolescents Inclusive Education Program. I am also a senator with Brockport Student Government, and I am the president of the Brockport Swing Dance Society, and I am in the Honors College. I'm just going to give a brief abstract of the essay that I wrote. So, as Carol mentioned, it is a comparative analysis of two different texts that I was grappling with at the time. The first one being Bechdel's Fun Home and Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, noticing a commonality between the two texts being coming of age through memoir-style writing. So first of all, Bechdel's Never Let Me Go being a graphic memoir, makes sense of Bechdel's experiences growing up as a lesbian in a heteronormative environment, using the visual imagery and graphic comic panels of her memoir. Meanwhile, Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, being of a completely different genre, science fiction, sci-fi dystopia, being completely a work of fiction, explores the experiences of these post-human clones growing up in a dystopian environment where sexuality and identity takes on this strange sort of distorted view because of their post-humanness against a dystopian backdrop. So my essay compares these two texts and notices commonalities of their, between them, having to do with these characters growing up, experiencing their changes in their identity through memoir. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, so, yeah. The question was, what do you look for when you're doing comparative analysis of texts? So obviously these are texts from a bit different decades and different genres, of course, being graphic memoir and sci-fi. So of course you wonder, how do you put those kind of two different types of genres, books, in conversation with each other? And the way that I did it was noticing common themes. Noticing how even though Bechdel's work is autobiographical, it is a memoir, it is a true story, and noticing how Ishiguro's work is sci-fi fiction, I was able to notice, hey, even though these books are different in genre, they both have this Bildungsroman, coming of age kind of writing, and they both interpolate memory with the present day to make sense of how like characters' identities build. All right, Thank you.
I feel like such an underachiever from my undergraduate experience listening to that. Congratulations, Theo. Well earned. Before we get to our keynote speaker, just have some acknowledgments and some logistical things that I want to announce. First, big thank you to everyone who helped put this day together. This is not easy to do. There's a lot of work that goes into this. And while our office and Brockport Student Government are sponsoring this event, it could not happen without the many members of our community. So first, I want to thank our Diversity Conference Planning Committee. There's a lot of y'all, so if you're in the room, stand up so people can see you and give you the round of applause that you deserve. Okay, somebody's calling us. I don't know who that is. I also want to thank our conference volunteers, again, members of our faculty, staff, and students who are giving their time today to make sure things run smoothly. I want to also thank Brockport Student Government again for their support in this event and making sure that not only our students are present, but that we are able to bring speakers to you that helps us engage in that difficult dialogue and stir our imagination. To the Student Union, Leadership and Activities staff, thank you so much for basically reserving everything in this building for today and making sure that we have what we need. Dan Lind and his team in Events Management, y'all just rock. I appreciate y'all so much. I want to thank Brockport Information Technology Services, not so much for this morning's keynote, but for later events that we're going to need their support on. The Center for Global Education and Engagement, they'll be running the International Festival later on today. Basque, University Marketing, and our folks in the print shop for making all the wonderful marketing materials for today. I want to thank all of our faculty, staff, and student presenters that they get to highlight their research and the initiatives that they are doing to ensure that Brockport is a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment. So a round of applause for everyone who is presenting today. To our wonderful colleagues and our students in journalism, broadcasting, and public relations, they are recording and streaming for us this morning, so wave at the folks behind the camera, thank y'all. I also want to say thank you to our wonderful ASL interpreters from Interpretech, who are making sure that we are inclusive in our communication. And to my wonderful staff in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Charlotte Wade, Susie Osher, Derek Frenney, and Zoe White, thank you so much for helping us put this together today. Some logistical things before we turn things over. For Brockport students, if you did not swipe your ID card when you came in, please do that on your way out. BSG wants to just have a sense of how many students are participating in their events. In regards to the breakout session with Reverend McBride after this, that says it's going to be here in the ballroom. We've moved that to B115, which is downstairs. And he will be continuing his comments on radical belonging with activating communities for belonging. So giving you kind of like a toolkit on how we can do that. And then I want to also ask that you join us at the end of the day. We're going to have a small networking reception, closing reception for the conference to close us out today. That's something we haven't done before. So if you're around at 4:35, 4:45, please come back here and say hello and hang out with us for a little bit. And I also just want to say hello to our special guest from Brockport High School. Say hello, wave. I know you're here. They have some posters out of the great work that they're doing around equity, diversity, and inclusion at Brockport High School. So please stop by their table and see what they got going on and what the bright future of our society is going to look like with these young people leading the way. So thank you for being with us today. So we're going to move along and I'm going to introduce our wonderful keynote speaker today. The Reverend Ben McBride is a native of San Francisco, a spiritual leader and longtime activist for peace and justice in the Bay Area. In 2008, he relocated his family to a challenging neighborhood in Oakland called the Kill Zone to understand and respond to the epidemic of gun violence firsthand. During this tenure, he was instrumental in relaunching Oakland's first successful iteration of Operation Ceasefire, a data-driven violence reduction strategy contributing heavily to nearly 50% reduction in homicides over 5 years. In 2014, Reverend McBride launched the Empower Initiative to support bridging and belonging work nationwide. A practitioner at Fostering Belonging, Reverend McBride serves as a national leader in reconstructing public safety systems and gun violence prevention work, including a background of training over 100 law enforcement departments and executives. He also led PICO California, the largest grassroots community organization in the state, representing 450,000 people across 73 cities, serving as the co-director from 2015 to 2020. Reverend McBride founded a national peacemaking initiative to address police community trust building during his tenure. Reverend McBride has served at the request of Vice President Kamala Harris as co-chair of California's Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board, focusing on ending racial profiling in California. In addition, he was featured in the Sundance Film Festival award-winning film, The Force, concentrating on his peacemaking efforts. Reverend McBride authored Troubling the Water, the urgent work of radical belonging, which is in our Drake Library, so go check it out, which was released in October 2023. A seasoned trainer, Reverend McBride specializes in fostering belonging and civility. He collaborates with companies, schools, universities, and students and values-driven organizations across the nation, delivering transformative and educational keynotes and workshops that can be customized for any organization. Please help me welcome Reverend McBride.
Good morning. It's good to be here in Brockport and to be in community with you all. Dr. King said that love is the only cement that can hold this broken community together, and that when I'm commanded to love, I'm commanded to resist injustice, to restore community, and to meet the needs of my brothers and sisters. And I'd like to help Dr. King and say relatives and gender nonconforming relatives and people. We're gonna help Dr. King get here into the 21st century. That was a joke. Maya Angelou said that, at the end of the day, people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did. What they won't forget is how you made them feel. So I want to invite you for the next few minutes to go on this journey with me as we think about this idea that I'd like to offer to you around the notion of radical belonging. When we think about belonging, the way that I like to think about belonging is really this notion around how do we widen our circle of human concern? In the sense of how do we begin to widen our view in ways that it brings in the lived experiences of others. But what makes that sense about belonging radical is that we actually work with those that we disagree with the most to widen the circle. And in a moment like now, I think it's difficult for a lot of us to try to figure out how do I actually work with people with whom I disagree with the most to widen my circle of human concern. I was actually in North Carolina getting a chance to share with some leaders there, and I was talking about belonging and let's widen the circle of human concern, and folks were nodding their head like, yeah, we're with that. I said, but we need to figure out how to do it with people who we disagree with the most. And folks were like, ooh, I'm not so sure. Right? You had me on the wide circle, but this notion about me doing it with the people that I disagree with, I'm just not so sure. Well, the reason that I hold this framework up and I want to invite you to go on this journey with me today, and let's go on it together, is because as a conversation I was having with a brother in Hawaii some years ago, and he was telling me about Maui. And he said, here on this island, we don't have the luxury that some of you all feel that you have on the mainland. He said, our island is small, and so we have to interact with each other. And because we have to interact with each other, we have to learn how to actually negotiate our differences with one another so that we can create this place as one where everyone could have a sense of safety, a sense of civility, and a sense of collaboration. And so I want to be inviting us to, even within the environment that we have, that is fraught with a lot of tension, to be thinking about how might I widen my circle of human concern. And rather than thinking about how do you do that across a big construct that is our national discourse, I want to invite you to think about what it would look like for you to widen the circle of human concern here on this campus. Here within this community, how might you widen it and how might you do so with the people that you disagree with the most? I like to say that life is lived in moments. If you think about your life, you probably, whether it's arriving here on this campus, or maybe it's the status of your family, maybe it's the most important relationships that you feel, but there was a moment that you met somebody, you engaged in a moment, somebody told you about this campus, and that moment shifted the trajectory of your life. Life is lived in moments. And sometimes you find the moment, but sometimes the moment actually finds you. Here was a moment that I had in my life that found me. This is the house that I lived in for close to 15 years. It's a house that's in a neighborhood in Oakland called the Kill Zone. It's the area where the majority of the gun violence happens in this city. There's a box that you actually can draw on the map of the city of Oakland, and close to 70% of all of the homicides happen within this box. And so I moved into this house at the time with my wife and 3 daughters. Our daughters were 8, 5, and 4. So we move into this community, and I'm trying to figure out what does it mean for me to be in this community? What does it mean for me to be in this story? What does it mean for me to widen my circle of human concern? I wasn't using all of that language, but that was what was in my heart in this journey. But in any case, I'm coming home one day from work as I'm engaged in the community work, doing that in the West and coming home here in the East. And as I come here to my doorsteps, there's a brother who liked to sit on my stairs, right? He had a tank top on, had his Air Force Ones on, and he's sitting on my stairs. And so I'd come up to the house and I'd kind of be like, hey man, why are you on my stairs? And he'd be like, you know, why you got to say something to me? And I'd be like, 'cause you on my stairs. And so he and I would normally do this back and forth, like, come on, man, why you on the stairs? You know, why you got to say something to me about being on the stairs? And then, you know, my wife would come home sometimes and she'd see him on the stairs, and then I'd go in the house and she'd want to have a conversation with me about why he was sitting on the stairs. Now, me and my wife, we don't have arguments. We have intense fellowships, all right? Some of y'all might know about an intense fellowship, right? So we would have an intense fellowship about him being on the stairs and her coming home from work with the girls, and you got to do something about this whole scenario. In any case, there's another day I come, we got the same thing happening. He's hanging out on the stairs. I look at him, I get ready to do the same thing that, you know, I normally do, but instead of just going at it, I paused. And I looked at him for a minute. And when he saw me pause, I asked him, I said, brother, we keep doing this. Tell me, why are you on these stairs? It's like when he saw me pause and take a moment, he looked at me and he said, hey man, no disrespect, I used to live here. He was like, and I realize that this is your house now. He was like, but when you and your family leave, I come and I hang out on these stairs because my mom has passed away, and she raised me in this house. And I come sit on these stairs because this is as close as I can get to my mother. And he said, so it's no disrespect to you. He said, I come sit on these stairs because this is where I feel like I belong. And what I recognized in that moment is that here you had two black dudes that were similar in complexion, similar in size. One story bringing me to a house that I'm thinking is my own. Another story that helps me understand that this house, this neighborhood actually had a story long before I got here. Forces that we could not control were pushing us together. And if not careful, we were going to find ourselves in conflict without taking a moment to pause, to widen our circle and get a bigger story. I think we're in a moment right now in a very pluralistic society where we need a bigger story. Here on this campus, we need a bigger story. One of the reasons that I wrote Trouble in the Water, I wrote it because certainly we need to disrupt the public systems, the organizational practices that have created too small of a circle of concern in the places that we live, the places we work, the societies that we share. So we need to disrupt the ways in which people find themselves excluded and pushed out of the circle of concern. But we also need to trouble the waters of our own hearts, our own minds, our own thoughts that cause us to see other human beings as irredeemable, as people who cannot change, as people who somehow cannot actually participate in this world that we all want to belong to. And so I want to be inviting you to think about as we journey, what does it mean not just for you to trouble the waters here on this campus, to create a wider circle where all students, all faculty, all alumni, all donors, all community members that engage in this wonderful place where they have that sense of belonging. But I want you to also think about what are the ways that you might need to trouble your own thoughts, your own minds, our own biases, our own ways that we have given up on certain human beings because we just are not sure that we can work with these people to create the world that we deserve. So I want to talk to us about what is the challenge and the obstacle to belonging, to this idea of radical belonging. The science actually talks to us that it is founded in something that Dr. John Powell from UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute has kind of coined as othering. So human beings, like mammals, when we find ourselves experiencing the stress of environments, what mammals do is they usually migrate away from the stress and the tension that an environment is bringing them. Could be climate, could be lack of an access to food or water, could be other animals that are moving into their ecosystem. They migrate away or they fight, right? It's just a way that mammals respond to their environment. But what Dr. Powell's science has begun to show us is that as human beings, the way we respond to the tension of a rapid changing environment around us is through something that he calls breaking. We respond in a social way to that tension that we feel. And in breaking, he says one of the main ways that we respond is through othering. So when we find ourselves under stress, our brain seeks to identify who is the cause of that stress. And we might find a particular group of people and say they don't look like me, they don't love like me, they don't pray like me, they don't study like me, they don't work like me, they don't vote like me. And because of that, I'm going to restrict them from my circle of human concern. I identify that these are the people that are stressing me out. They're causing me to feel less safe. And so not only am I going to push them out, but I'm going to dehumanize them in a way that actually doesn't cause me to desire that they have the same things that I want. And we push them out not because we're bad people, but we push them out because our brains are trying to manage the tension. And in our larger narrative, there has now been an idea that is being pushed that you're actually safer when you are segregated from those who are different from you. But what the science around belonging suggests is that actually if we push against the temptation to lean into that othering and actually take the invitation to find safety in our integration over our segregation, we will build the power that is necessary to create a wider circle of human concern and even begin to do the work, as Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt's work at Stanford has begun to teach us. We can begin to reprogram our brains to actually see difference as safety rather than difference as threat. One of the things that her institute has begun to find in the Spark Institute is something in our brain called FFA, or fusiform face area. And maybe you found this in your own life without the scientific term. Have you ever had that sense that, well, y'all not gonna say it because this is the diversity conference, so we all supposed to act like we got it all figured out here. But if you would privately say in your own brain, you've had this reality where other people of different backgrounds have a tendency to look like each other. You have this sense where you're like, I just had an Uber driver the other day, he told me, you look just like such and such actor. And I'm sitting there to myself like, I don't look nothing like that actor. But what I realized in that moment was it was a function of what the science calls a fusiform face area. When we are babies, we get used to, our brain gets programmed to seeing the faces of the people who are actually taking care of us, who are feeding us, who are nursing us. And our brain's first understanding about who to trust and who to find safety is the face that we are looking at. And our brain actually programs itself to understand its safety by the face that we are looking at, and it has a tendency to not as easily find safety in other faces. It's actually been proven in a way where even babies raised by a parent of a different ethnic origin will find safety in the face of the person raising them rather than a face of their own reflection. So what we're dealing with in this moment is not just the notion of somehow there are good people and that there are bad people, but we're dealing with the notion that we have real limitations as mammals, as human beings. And so the invitation is, how do we build our muscle to do the work of creating radical belonging, widening the circle of human concern, particularly with those that we disagree with the most? Now, knowing those moments when we think about, okay, how do we get there? We try to run to this notion of, okay, well, what do we need to do? Ben, give us the prescription. How do we make this happen? But I actually think the wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? The wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? And how does that becoming inform for us a different kind of doing that is currently not within our reach? Who would you have to become in order to widen the circle for students and faculties who love differently than you? Who do you need to become in order to make more space for people who pray different than you? Who do you need to become to actually humanize people who vote very differently from you? Who do you need to become to actually be in relationship with people who see public policy and foreign policy very different from you? Who do you have to become to widen your circle of human concern, to make the decision to humanize rather than to otherize? Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa is one of his spiritual leaders of the South Africa apartheid resistance movement. Says, if you want peace, don't talk to your friends, talk to your enemies. And so the question is, who do we have to become to build our capacity to be in relationship with our enemies, or our perceived enemies? Now, I hold for us that the challenge around all of this, again, is not that we've got bad hearts. It's that we're busy. We're dealing with fusiform face area. We're dealing with the physiological response in us as mammals up under stress. And it's just difficult to slow down. Now, I've experienced this in my own life. I remember being, in some moments that have really caused me to think about how I respond to power dynamics and the different ways that we show up in this story. I'd like to offer this framework for us as a way for us to think about the challenge and the difficulty that we face. It's something that I call the quadrant. Now, we know that our experiences as human beings are much more complex than a quadrant, but this is just a drawing to invite us to think about this idea of belonging and this idea of widening the circle of human concern. If you use this quadrant as a framework, I oftentimes say that most of us, when trying to confront a problem, we have a tendency to live our lives in the back corner of our quadrant. That could be your racial identity, that could be your gender identity, could be your religious identity, your class identity, the place you come from. And usually when we're looking at the problems across a campus or across our city or across the community, we have a tendency to look at that problem from the perspective that we come from. And I know not y'all here in Brockport, because y'all are all the amazing people that we have here, but the rest of us are challenged with this notion of talking to the people who are just like us, looking at the problems we're trying to solve and saying, if they would just do it like this, it's that easy. If they would just follow these 3 or 4 steps, we'd get to the answer that we all need to get to. But usually that idea is coming from the back corner of our own tribal and affinity group experience. Now, it's not that our tribal and group affinity experiences are bad, it's just that they're limited. They only bring us the perspective of those that we have from our own orientation. And in our call to foster belonging, the invitation is not for us to stop being who we are, but actually to find a different version, a different way to be who we are. That instead of only living your life in the back corner of your quadrant, we actually learn how to live our lives at the intersection of multiple quadrants, where our worldview, our learning, our understanding, instead of just being informed by the group that you come from, it's actually being informed by multiple perspectives across a spectrum of difference, right? And so the invitation for us is to recognize that what we are wanting to do is to learn how do we move and get more information and more perspective and more experiences that actually change the way that we show up. Now, the reason I love this quadrant as an idea is because it helps us recognize that none of us are the same. We all are dealing with a lot of different dynamics, but we can actually come together, share our ideas, share our realities, and come up with solutions that we never could get on our own in the back corner of our own experience. I have had moments where I've really been challenged to think about how to create radical belonging. As it was said in the bio, I spent a lot of time being engaged in trying to save the lives, particularly of Black and brown young men who were dying on the streets of Oakland, California. And, right now I'm a lot more calm and collected as I share my remarks with you. But there were times where I used to be very, I think this line will work here, very turned up when I was engaged in the work of trying to save the lives of young people who were dying. I had many moments running outside of my house, having to put my hands in the bleeding wound of people who were dying on the street in front of my house to try to save lives. And so I was traumatized by that reality about what inaction really meant for people that were vulnerable and at risk. And I remember being down at a town hall meeting. And, I'm sitting there and I'm ready to provide some public comment so that I could call on our elected leaders to put the necessary resources and funding in place to save the lives of our young people who were at risk. And so as I come in, they say, Reverend McBride, you got to wait. And I said, I got to wait. They said, you're not first on the queue. Somebody else is here and they need to provide public comment. So I'm looking around. I'm like, well, who's here? And it was a young white brother. And they said, well, he's here. And I was like, well, what's he here to talk about? They said, bike lanes. I was like, bike lanes? I was like, bike lanes? I was like, I'm here to talk about a real problem, What's he here? No, he's here to talk about bike lanes. So I sat down all kind of disgruntled and, I'm fidgeting and I'm kind of upset. So I'm sitting down. This young white brother gets up and he says something that I've never forgotten. He got up and he said, I ride around in a city whose roads were not designed for me. They were designed for automobiles. He said, so I ride around in this city, and I am in fear for my life on a daily basis because I'm riding around in a story not designed for me. And he said, I'm not really concerned about the very aggressive drivers. He was like, I can kind of feel them coming. I can feel the rumble in the ground. I can hear the music coming. He said, I'm not really that concerned about the aggressive driver. He said, you know the person that I'm really concerned about? He said, soccer moms, is what he said. I said, soccer moms? He said, I'm concerned about soccer moms because they have such good things happening in their car that I'm likely to be in their blind spot. They're not going to see me. They're going to hit me, run me over, get out of the car, try to nurse me back to health, call the ambulance, and really make sure that I'm okay. He was like, but here's the thing. I don't want to get run over. He was like, so can you put a bike lane in the city so that I can get where it is that I need to go and they can get where it is that they need to go? I remember sitting there and I was like, okay, a little hyperbolic, but all right. Young brother's got some bars. All right, I'm appreciating that. He's got something to say, right? Wasn't my lived experience, but I'm like, okay. Now, some of you might know who this individual is. This is Shawn Bradley. He was an NBA player, one of the tallest NBA players to ever play in the NBA, 7'6". Not the greatest player, but he played. I wish I had that height. I might not be talking to y'all here, but I would have found something else to do, right? But he found a way to use that 7'6" throughout his time and do some great things in the league. What a lot of people don't know about Shawn Bradley is that he's an avid cyclist. Now, it was always difficult for him to figure out how to create bicycles that a 7'6" person could comfortably ride because the industry was not created for Shawn. And so he found a way to create and construct these cycles that could handle not just his height, but also his weight. And he was riding around on his bike. And actually, during the pandemic, I ended up running into this story later. During the pandemic, he was in a bicycle accident. He was riding in a small kind of town village where there were no bike lanes, and he was hit by guess who? A soccer mom. She hit him exactly what the young white brother said to me in Oakland. She got out, she called 911, she cared for him, she helped him get himself together, but now Shawn is having to live the rest of his life now moving into a new community because he's now paralyzed for the majority of his body, and now he's stepping into a new disability community where the wheelchairs are also not designed for somebody his size. When I read this story in Sports Illustrated, it reminded me of that conversation that young brother was saying at the town hall. And what I realized was, although I had not been a cyclist, my lack of understanding around the dangers that cyclists experience in a city did not make the dangers less real. They just made them different. I was there to talk about one kind of safety that was very close to my community, as if that was the only safety that needed to be created. And here was somebody who looked very different from me, probably lived in a different part of town, who was talking about a different version of safety that I did not have proximity to. And when we talk about radical belonging, the invitation is, how do we create a story that is big enough for all of our conversations of safety to happen at the same time without saying that we only have enough safety pie for one group of people? It's to hold the reality that young brother knew a truth that I did not know. And I had a truth that maybe he did not know. And if we were going to get to a wider circle, the only way that was going to happen was for myself and that cyclist to actually be at a shared table about the resources, talking about what public safety needed to look like, not just for my neighborhood, but for both of our neighborhoods. And so the invitation for us is to think about, how do we become the kinds of people that can have a conversation beyond just our own experience, but one that is also inclusive of other people's experiences. So I'm going to give us 3 shifts as I begin to land this plane that can help us get to radical belonging. The first one, everybody, if you would join me, say build. The first shift is to build shared humanity. In building shared humanity, the invitation is to make more space and more room for perspectives that are not like your own. And so here, the way that could look on a campus is, how is it that instead of only creating a club or creating a space or creating a dialogue that is just designed for you to hear what you already will hear in the circles that you're in, what would it look like to design a space, to design a dialogue, to create a club, to create some space for you to hear a perspective that is actually very different from your own? And in building that space, we're not building that space simply so that we can reaffirm the things that we already believe and hear, but we're designing that space so that we can hear the perspectives that are not as proximate to us. I want to be able to create a space to understand, to listen, to learn. I want to create room so that I can get more proximate to someone else's lived experience that I would never have proximity to. If you grew up in the city, it's getting more proximate to people who grew up in a rural community. If you grew up with resources, it's getting more proximate to those who have grown up without resources. It could be creating more space for those who may have the resources to pay for the education coming on campus versus those that are having to come towards that conversation through a lot of different other pathways and resources to find a way to educate themselves. In building shared humanity, we want to create room for more perspectives than our own. And then the second shift is to bridge. Everyone say bridge. We want to bridge across difference. Now, when we talk about bridging, bridging does not mean agreement. Bridging also does not mean affirmation, because there are some things I just don't agree with and I just don't affirm, right? Bridging doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean affirmation. What bridging means is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of another perspective, another point of view. And in bridging, what we're seeking to do is step into the shoes of someone else to see the story or the challenge from their point of view. Now, I remember when I got involved with training law enforcement, that was something that was not exciting for me, particularly in the beginning. My great uncle was lynched by off-duty police officers in North Carolina. So I had some of my own personal reasons to stay out of a conversation with a department and an industry that I had my own family trauma with. But I remember going in and, this was about 10 years ago. And so we were right at the beginning of the movement for Black Lives, and Ferguson had just happened, and there was a lot happening in the country similar to ways that there's a lot happening in the country right now. And I went in to try to have a conversation with law enforcement about the relationship. And as the lieutenant was finishing up his words and he was introducing me, there was a lot of warmth in the room, and then he introduced me and I came up and the room went silent. And so I was like, okay, what just happened? And nobody would say anything. I was like, come on, what just happened? And finally an officer in the back, he started raising his hand and he started hiding back in his pocket. I was like, come on, don't hide your hand. What's going on? And he said, you don't know what it feels like to walk in our shoes. He was like, so we're going to be respectful. We're going to listen to what you have to say, but you don't know what it feels like to walk in our shoes. I remember going home. I talked to my wife that night. I was like, man, here I am trying to do this. I'm volunteering, et cetera, et cetera. She said, well, what did he say? I said, he's like, you'll know what it feels like to walk in our shoes. She was like, well, you actually don't know what it feels like to walk in their shoes, so why don't you start with that? So the next day I came in with my size 13 white Air Force Ones, and I literally walked in front of them and I held them up and I said, shoes. I don't know what it feels like to walk in your shoes. I don't know what it feels like to take the risks that you do on a daily basis. I don't know what it feels like to have to kiss your family, not knowing if you ever see them again. I don't know what it feels like to make a split-second decision and know your humanity is going to be judged for the rest of your life on that. I don't know what it feels like to walk in your shoes. I only know what it feels like to walk in these shoes. But my hope is over the next 90 minutes, you'll let me talk to you about these shoes. Maybe you'll trust me to talk to me about your shoes, and we can figure out a larger story to get my shoes and your shoes on a journey we both can belong to. It changed the dynamic. And it created an opportunity that didn't disappear the hundreds of years of infractions and injustice that has happened, but it created an opportunity for us to acknowledge each other's point of view. And when people say, okay, that's great, you acknowledge each other's point of view, so is that what this radical belonging work is about? It's just about hugging each other and recognizing each other's point of view? No, it's about doing the work of belonging through co-creation. What that turned into was a reality that not only did we learn how to understand each other's points of view, but then we were able to erect the kinds of structures and systems that were necessary. And I began to learn things about their background, as did others that I was a part of, and they got a chance to learn about ours. And in a city that averaged an officer-involved killing every 6 weeks for 20 years, we went 4 out of 5 years without an officer-involved killing. So the belonging, us working together across difference, not only did it change our human experience, but it actually saved real lives by changing the systems, the structures, and the practices that widen the circle of human concern. Build shared humanity, bridge across difference, and belong through co-creation. I know this conversation is a tough one in a moment like we have right now, because it feels to a lot of people that there's just no room to be in deep relationship with people who are different. But my invitation to us is, if we're going to build the world that we all deserve, how do we get in deeper relationship and build our muscle, practicing right here on campus with the people who are most different from us? Now, we know that exclusion is not where we want to be. Having people outside the circle of human concern, that's not what we want here at Brockport. We don't want people on the outside, regardless as to who they look like or how they love or how they pray or who they voted for or the class that they come from or the place that they come from or their status, whether they're a formerly incarcerated person, whether they're undocumented. We don't want people excluded. Inclusion is better than exclusion, because at least it begins to bring people inside the circle of human concern. And equity is even better than inclusion, because it tries to address the conversation about what do people really need as they are pulled within the circle of human concern. But I would invite us to also begin to think about belonging, because belonging is about how do we actually begin to co-create a campus, a community that actually is not just about one group saying we're going to include you or we're going to give you equity, but we're actually going to co-create what this campus looks like, what public space looks like, what we all need. We're going to co-create so that all of us feel this deep sense of belonging, even if I disagree with you deeply. And sometimes when I talk about this idea of the circle of human concern, I say there's some people, because of how they want to be human, that I want them to be on the other side of the circle of human concern. But I still want to make sure that they are within the circle, having the access to resources, to thriving, and to opportunity in the same ways that I do. As I close, I want to say that tolerance has got to be off the table. None of us want to be tolerated. I don't want to be tolerated. Somebody's like, oh, let's have tolerance. I don't want tolerance. I tolerate a bad meal at a restaurant. We don't want tolerance. What we want is the work of active belonging, and that's going to take us becoming deeper and better, stronger versions of ourselves that can create a campus, a community, and subsequently a country that we all deserve. But it's not going to happen in the most ideal scenario. It's going to happen in the scenario that we're in, which means it's going to take real courage from all of us. So I want to finish with this story about courage. This is my father, who I love. He's still living. Right now, he's battling Alzheimer's. And so this is a picture of him back when he was younger. He got drafted into the American war in Vietnam. And you know, my dad, he had told me this, you know, story before, you know, as I was growing up. He was like, you know, I was a bricklayer when I left North Carolina, and then I went up to Detroit, and I was a part of the car industry boom, and then I went to Kansas City, and I was a part of the airline, you know, industry boom. And I used to be like, oh, my dad's this cosmopolitan guy, you know, he's like a mover and a shaker. And then like 5 years ago, we were at IHOP, and he was like, no, I was just draft dodging. I didn't want to go to the war. And I was like, oh, man, you messed up the story. You know, it was a better story when you were this cosmopolitan guy, but okay. And he was like, I didn't want to go to the war, and one of the big reasons he didn't want to go is because my father grew up in the Jim Crow South. He actually met Dr. King when he was 14 years old. And he told me Dr. King wasn't the Dr. King that you all talk about now. He was much more of just a regular social change, community organizer type speaker that would go around to schools and have conversations and go to community meetings. He actually said during that time when I was younger, he said a lot of people didn't like Dr. King. You know, it's only in the benefit that, you know, now, you know, when you talk to people, everybody march with Dr. King, and I tell them all the time, the only benefit y'all have is that Dr. King is dead, right? Because he can't tell on none of y'all, right? But everybody's like, oh, I was with it. But the reality is everybody wasn't. He said, but he came to our school, he had 2 mock-ups of a white fountain and a colored fountain. He said he turned them around, showed us that we were actually drinking the same water as our white counterparts. And he said, I have this awakening in rural North Carolina. He said, I became a part of the civil rights movement, became a part of the lunch counter sit-ins. He was like, I was all signed up for it, and then I got drafted into the Vietnam War. And he was like, I didn't want to be a part of it, so I ran around. He said, but they caught up with him in San Francisco, which is why I'm from San Francisco. He said they caught up with him, and they told him, if you don't go, your brother Tom is going. But one of you is going to Vietnam. And my dad said, I felt like I had an impossible decision. Either my younger brother potentially was going to lose his life, or I was. And so he said, I made the decision that I was going to go to Vietnam to save the life of my brother. And he did. And he told me, people don't understand war. He said, not just what it does to the place that you're doing war in, but what it does to the people who have to engage in it. And he said it was a horrible scenario. He said, you know, it took away a lot of our humanity. He said one of the things that we were taught is that we had to go in, we had to chase, as my dad likes to say, all the beautiful Vietnamese people out of their communities, chase the elders, chase the children out of the communities, and burn the villages to the ground. And he said, as I was coming into a village and we were told, if somebody comes running out at you, you have the license to discharge your firearm and to take their life. And he says, as we're coming into a community, says this elderly Vietnamese woman comes running out to him, GI, GI, GI. And he said, for whatever reason, I didn't discharge my firearm. He said, I paused, right? Similar to that pause I was talking about earlier. He says, I paused and I put my head down. He said, and she got on her toes and she whispered in my dad's ear, Martin Luther King, know you here? Martin Luther King, know you here? He says, immediately in that moment, I realized that I actually had the capacity to make a different decision. I actually didn't have to be an agent of violence in the middle of this story. He said, I made a choice to remember what Dr. King had taught me as a kid in the middle of the jungles of Vietnam, and he became an unofficial conscientious objector and said, I'm no longer going to kill the Vietnamese people. I'm not going to be a part of this violence. And so in his strategy, and this is in his quote, he said, we're going to bribe the white guys in the tower with Johnny Walker Red, whiskey, and weed to not tell on us so we can just move through this jungle and get out of here without taking anybody's lives. Right? So the moral of the story is we've got take-home bags of whiskey and weed all in the lobby for everybody to. Some of y'all are like, oh, this is the real diversity conference. But I think you pick up the moral of the story, right? That my dad had to become a different version of himself in very difficult circumstances. But he found the capacity to become a different version of himself. But I actually don't think my dad is the hero of the story. I actually think that the Vietnamese woman is the heroine of the story, the shero of the story, because she had every reason in the world to mistrust my dad, to not see his humanity, to actually push him outside of her circle of human concern. I mean, in fact, my dad was the one that was in her country, creating violence, bringing harm to her communities. But for whatever reason, she saw the humanity in my dad, and she called him in instead of calling him out into a deeper version of himself. And because of that, not only did she save her community, but I believe she probably saved my dad's life and probably gave birth to my own. And I don't know her name, I wish I did. But I traveled around the country telling the story of Mama Son, keeping the legacy of this powerful Vietnamese woman alive, because she demonstrated in that moment the kind of courage that I think we need in this one. In the most difficult circumstances, how do you choose to become the person that can see the humanity of the person you disagree with the most, widen your circle of human concern, and co-create them to create more belonging? Build shared humanity, bridge across difference, and let's belong through co-creation, and finally create the world, the community, a nation, not just that we all can belong to, but one that we can deserve. And for those of you, as I finally close, you know, I'm a retired preacher, so that means I close 3 times. You know, it's like, I'm a close, I'm a close, I'm a close. But now I'm finally going to close. Is this notion that I get it for some of us that might be saying, I'm just not with you, Ben. I don't think this belonging thing is the answer to our moment. I just want to say, I feel you. I feel you. I've had moments like that. I still have moments like that. But I remember this moment that continues to inspire me, which is when I was a part of the Ferguson Uprising back in 2014. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But I remember being there on the ground, and particularly on this day, we went to the Ferguson police station after the killing of Michael Brown on Canfield Street. And we went to the Ferguson Police Department. Dr. West, many of us were there. And we went there to ask the police department to actually take some responsibility for what had happened to Michael Brown. And we were met with arrest and with violence. And we were arrested. I had never been in jail until that day. So then we found ourselves in jail. It's actually a pretty, kind of strange dynamic. So imagine if you just in jail because, you stole a sandwich or something like that. Then all of a sudden, you're sitting there in jail and, Dr. Cornel West comes walking through and all these preachers with vestments. I had this guy, he was looking up, he was like, what am I doing here? I'm in the wrong place. In any case, being arrested and being in jail is a very dehumanizing experience. I'd never been an experience where I have another human being that's taking the clothes off of my body and taking my religious garments off of my body and taking my shoes off and taking the shoelaces out of my shoes and moving me around as they hold my body. And I'm just getting more angry and frustrated as this is happening. My brother Mike, who's also in this work, we're in there together along with many others. And as this is happening, Dr. Cornel West keeps saying to the sheriffs who are moving us around, oh, thank you, good brother. Thank you, good sister. Oh, thank you, good brother. Thank you, good sister. Oh, thank you, good brother. Thank you, good sister. And my brother Mike looks at Dr. West and he goes, Doc, as we call him. He was like, this ain't no thank you, good brother. Thank you, good sister moment. All right. Oh, so he looks at my brother and he says, oh, good brother, good brother, good brother. And he says this word. He says, always leave the light on because you never know when they'll come home. I want to invite those of us that might say, I just don't believe there's a way to create radical belonging with people who are different from me. My invitation is leave the light on for them. For the person that you feel is most different from you, leave the light on for them in the same way that someone has left the light on for you until we can all get home to a place of belonging together. Thank you for listening. All right, so I think now we'll have 10 minutes for some questions, pushback, some Ben, you crazy, but questions, thoughts. Wait for the break. We want, oh, and then wait for someone to bring the microphone to you. So any questions coming up for anyone? Okay, we got one question in the back, I think.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My question comes from, right, so the work that you're doing involves community, it involves a lot of networking and building those relationships, but internally, right, like what do you recommend for someone, no, you're fine. I'm called to stand up. What do you recommend, or how did you experience the process of that internal individual identity development to be ready to be called to do some of this work, or to build that relationship, build that belonging? And I'll be honest, right, in our current state, there's feelings of hopelessness, or, stagnant, or just feeling like, I got to get through the day to just make the day end. And so, to some of those themes, like what insight can you provide?
Yeah. So I would say I would encourage folks check that book out of the library, because I talk about this in detail. Particularly, I would draw your attention to something that I call the 5 A's. And it's speaking exactly to what you talk about, our own personal formation to be able to show up differently. Those 5 A's, I'll say them quickly, are awareness, accountability, articulation, advocacy, and activation. I'll give a quick sentence for each one. In awareness, we want to grow in our awareness about other people's othering, how people are othered, but also grow in other people's knowledge about other people's experiences, right? So we want to grow in our awareness. Then we want to take some time to focus on accountability. Are there any ways that we have been complicit in anyone else's othering? And to make sure that we first are doing some reflection on ourselves about how might I need to change so that I could show up to the story differently. The third A is articulation. We want to learn how to actually talk about someone else's experience in the way that they would talk about their experience. The fourth A is advocacy. We want to figure out, what does it mean to actually show up for the flourishing of someone who is different in a way that does not benefit us? And then the fifth way is activation. It's at that point that I encourage that we're then ready to engage in the belonging work. A critique that I have is there's been too much shortcutting of that process. People get aware of something that's happening, and then they want to jump all the way to activation. But they have not done the internal work about their own personal accountability with reflection, and then learning how to talk about someone's experience in a way that does not other or simplify someone else's experience. And then before we're ready to actually start marshaling others in the work of belonging, we first need to put some skin in the game ourselves. And so, a quick example for me has been that when I began to show up in the immigrant rights movement, that meant that I first had to go on a journey about what it meant for me to think about how I had been complicit in the ways that undocumented people had been othered in my area, and I was not engaged in it. I had to get more deeply in the work. It wasn't about just showing up at a protest. It was about getting much deeper in relationship with people who were undocumented, and then asking myself the question, what does love call on me to think about these human beings that actually need support, rather than just thinking about it from a public policy perspective. So I had to go on that journey. I had to do on the same thing through that same journey as a straight person in relationship to the LGBTQ plus reality, and think about, what does it mean for me to go on that journey? How have I been complicit in the harm that has happened to those communities? And then how can I show up not as just an ally, but actually as a sibling that shows up alongside our LGBTQ plus relatives in a way that they would say is meaningful and supportive. So I'm encouraging us to not just try to find new words to say, but actually go on a journey so that we could show up differently. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Sorry if I sound congested, because I am congested. So it's mostly a comment about the idea of going towards people who disagree with you. It's not an easy thing to do. And if I can inject a little bit of my story. So I moved here from Canada 25 years ago. And in the last 8-9 years, this country is really very different from the one I moved. 25 years ago. And especially after this past November, as a family, we do have the option of, well, we can go back to Canada, we can run away from this, or do we want to stay here and fight to make the country to make the country better for these kids, for the high school kids or the younger, and for the society in general. So we're leaning towards fighting very much, but it's not, as you mentioned, it's not an easy thing to do. It's very easy to make up plans with people who agree with you, but working with people who disagree with you, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. The one thing I would say too, just in relationship to that, just to clarify, is like a real bridge, you know how you can't, if you try to build a bridge from here to South Africa, you're probably not going to be successful, right? So in that same way, you can't build a bridge everywhere, and you can't build a bridge with everyone. But just because you can't build it everywhere with everyone doesn't mean you can't build it with some folks. And so I'm always encouraging us to think about the short bridges that we can engage in. And in that, it's how can we find the way to be hard on systems that need to change while learning how to be soft on people. And that's a kind of flexibility that I want to encourage us to think about. Hard on systems, soft on people. I think we have time for one or... Dr. Davis will give me the hook when it's time. All right, one more.
Hi, Reverend McBride. I'm very happy that you were able to come today. I had a question about, in situations where you were initially met with hostility, how you go about de-escalation and kind of opening the floor for further discussion.
Mm-hmm. So it's a complex answer that I'd love to get some more time to talk about so as to not short it, because it depends what kind of hostility. And so to the point that I just shared, some levels of hostility cannot be engaged, right? Because the person is not really looking to bridge. And so I think we have to have some awareness around that. What I have found, though, that is a good method of de-escalation is when we can build our capacity to actually acknowledge the other person's lived experience. People have a tendency to be more hostile when they feel like they are not seen, or when they feel like their pain is being reduced, or they're being told they don't have any pain. And so what I found is if I want to talk to somebody who has defenses up, I've got to first get good at being able to talk to them about their lived experience. That gives me the opportunity to share about my own or another community that is being impacted. I've caught some heat for that, and I'm always good with catching heat because I'm not the divine and I don't have all the answers. I'm a practitioner. But some of the heat I've called is, well, people who are vulnerable and people who've been marginalized should not bear the responsibility of having to tell the story to somebody else who has more privilege. They shouldn't have to hold all of that. I go, yes, and in a perfect world, I agree with you. But we don't live in a perfect world. So if we're going to find ways to bridge with each other, human beings are human beings. So we have to find a way to grow in our ability to talk about other people's stories. And this is why I say we can't be in every story. Sometimes we have to say, I don't know enough about that, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. But let's figure out what stories you can be a part of and get really good about those stories, really good about that language. And what I say is let's become linguistically strategic so that we learn how to speak the dialects of different people's experiences so we can help them reduce their stress, create an opportunity to share our own. All right? Hopefully to see a few of y'all in the breakout. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you, Reverend McBride. Just a couple of quick things as y'all depart. There are programs on the front table that has all of our breakout sessions, time and location. Again, if you want to hang out with the Rev a little bit more, this morning he'll be in room B115, which is downstairs. Also, particularly for our students, if you like fun stuff, fidgets and all the things, pens, stickers, we have those out on the table. Please take those because we're not trying to take them back to the office. And he will be around throughout the day. So if you see him elsewhere, feel free to say hello and stop by. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you later on today.